Hello there and welcome to our special and continuous coverage of Ukraine-Russia escalated tensions, where Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky urged residents to take up arms as heavy fighting rages around the capital. Ukraine's military says it repelled Russian troops' attack on Kiev military base. Russia has vetoed a UN Security Council resolution calling on it to withdraw from Ukraine. Spokesperson says Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky is ready to discuss ceasefire and peace with Russia. United States says it will sanction Russian President Vladimir Putin and Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. In addition, Russian forces are advancing towards Ukraine's capital, Kiev, as they continue their assaults on the country. Putin calls for Ukraine's military to remove the country's government from power. And finally, UN says more than 50,000 Ukrainians have fled to other countries since the fighting started. And now we move to another story, and still Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky posted a video on Twitter where he has appeared outside his office in Ukraine or in Kiev, telling the public not to believe false reports and pledging to fight as Russia's forces which stormed towards the capital. Let's have a listen.
Всім доброго ранку, українці.
Good morning to all Ukrainians. There is a lot of fake information on the internet now, saying I'm calling for our army to lay down its arms and that an evacuation is underway. Well, I'm here. We will not lay down any weapons. We will defend our state, because our weapon is our truth. Our truth is that this is our land, our country, our children, and we will defend all this. That's what I wanted to tell you. Glory to Ukraine.
Слава Україні.
Now, let me welcome the panel of guests who are joining us live via Skype. Hamoud Salhi, Associate Dean Professor from the United States, in addition to Adam Ben Said, who joins us via phone from Turkey, who is a strategic consultant, is investigative journalist, and Lokman Kadarag via Skype as well from Malaysia, PhD researcher at International Islamic University. But before we start our discussion, please do allow me to share with you this map and tell you how far are the Russian forces advancing towards Kiev city center. According to Ukrainian officials on Friday, Russian troops arrived in Obolon, less than 6 miles from the center of Kiev. Reports suggest the main Russian advances towards Kiev are from Ivankiv to the northwest and Chernobyl to the northeast. Gunfire has been heard in the central government area of the city center near the presidential office. And now back to my panel of journalists. Welcome all, and thank you so much for joining us. I start with you, Hamoud Salhi. Can you tell us a little bit about how fast are the Russians moving amid Ukrainian stiff resistance? Is it in accordance to Russian plans?
It really depends on which reports you're reading. Of course, the Russian are stating that they are moving according to plans. The American media and the European are calling it as a slow, and it's not what they expected. What you've seen on the ground is that there is certainly a lot of things that were not expected, that the Russians did not expect. They are not moving as fast as they expected, because the initial plan, this was supposed to be ending in a few days, and it looks like it might get longer than what they expected.
Cool. Now, let me just bring into our conversation via phone Adam. UN Security Council had an urgent meeting but failed to pass sanctions on Russia, since the latter is a member of the veto countries. What is the alternative for the UN Security Council now?
Hello. Yes, thank you for having me. In my opinion, there's not much of an alternative. The vote was up to 15 members on the Security Council, while 11 voted in favor. It only takes one from the big Security Council powers to sort of cancel it. The UN is in a bit of a deadlock now, and I don't expect major solutions to come there until the U.S. Sort of takes a more active role in the conflict. So far, they've only been providing sort of ISR capabilities, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, target acquisition as well. which is frankly quite a bit in terms of security cooperation. But within the UN for now, I don't see any solutions coming unless Western powers are willing to escalate this entire situation to humanitarian intervention or a peacekeeping mission. In that case, the UN will be the correct forum for that sort of thing. I can answer that.
Okay, talking about these efforts, back to you, Hamoud, the representative of the United States of America in the Security Council of the United Nations, Linda Greenfield, spoke yesterday. And as she spoke in front of the Security Council's urgent meeting, as I have followed her speech, she has clearly spoken about Russia's empire. What are her implications?
Well, the message is clear from the United States and the Europeans, including the Ukraine, that this is part of Putin. And again, it's personalized. And he's there since he came to power to establish or to bring us back to the what the United States refer to as an empire, a Russian empire, posing the issue as an imperialist who is going to not just be satisfied with Ukraine, but other areas. In her message, the ambassador was very clearly emphasizing the propaganda war, namely, on the one hand, she sends an implied warning that the world is united and the world is ready to stop the Russians. But at the same time, there is also in a speech a call for de-escalation, for calling Putin to come to the table. But overall, what the United States is trying to portray, as it has been doing for quite some time, it is trying to project that image that this is a threat not just to the Ukraine, but it's a threat to the Europeans, to the world order, and the Russians are there with plans of their own to drive us to a nuclear war, to a third war type of scenario. So it is well within the framework that the US and the Europeans are trying to rally international support against Putin.
Hamoud, always with you, and I'm just asking here about President Putin, who said it clearly that the West and Europe are paying the price of dividing the Soviet Union. What is he hinting to?
Well, it's a message that the Putin and the Russians have been saying for quite some time now. The end of the Cold War. Remember that we were supposed to move towards, a peaceful one system, interdependent, and everyone is happy. The Americans were talking about, the end of history, all of that. What happened is that we've seen the mission of NATO, for example, became more expansionist. It's the NATO that expanded beyond its original border. The purpose of NATO was to be a force against the Eastern Europe, the former Soviet Union. The collapse of the Soviet Union meant that the mission of the NATO has changed. Instead, we saw the NATO becoming more involved in international affairs, in Afghanistan, for example, and in Europe. So what Putin is saying, and it makes sense, is that we need to have a pause and talk about this new world order. And that, unfortunately, we haven't had that discussion because we've been constantly driven by the national security aims of the main power, the United States and others. So in that context, he's correct in making that point.
All right. Back to you, Adam. Pentagon came across the line of these tensions as it is studying fallback supply lines to Ukraine. How far is it going to play a decisive role amid these escalated tensions, Adam?
I agree with the guest that just spoke. Thank you for that excellent intervention, that ultimately this is an issue of framing. And while the Department of Defense, the U.S. Department of Defense, is making a lot of noise about these sort of military support and the supply lines that they're willing to offer, in the end of the day, a gun needs somebody to be picked up, and you can't expect civilians to do that sort of thing. It is entering the humanitarian crisis. To go back to the issue of framing, however, I think it's very interesting that what's not being mentioned right now is that the current situation is, in a sense, a direct reflection of the U.S. drawdown in NATO and the withdrawal. The U.S. does go between periods of interventionism and isolationism, and it just happens that the U.S. has been withdrawing its troops from NATO and in Germany and in Turkey. During the height of the Cold War and even afterwards, for like 10 years, this would not have been possible. There were contingency plans by NATO for Russian armored movements across Eastern Europe. What we're looking at here is, the mission of NATO has changed, but the nation states have not adapted to it. We're looking at sort of like the same effect that we've seen within the European Union, an over-bureaucratization, slow ossification of the organization, and Putin has played very well on this, in my respect.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think the U.S. will be able to provide much more unless it's willing to put boots on the ground, because as it is right now, this is a question of even the U.S. deployments right now are not there to stop Russia, but to scare it into the possibility of a hot war and escalation. It's more of a containment of the situation. But even then, this should have come a long time ago.
Great. Let me just move with me to have an idea about the military power of both countries involved in these tensions. I'm talking here about Russia and Ukraine. The Global Firepower website published a comparison between the air and ground combat power of Russia and Ukraine based on statistics for the year 2022 and on the basis of the number of recruits and the mechanisms that each party has. It is noteworthy that the Russian army ranks second among the most powerful armies in the world after the United States of America, while the Ukrainian army ranks 25th. While the number of Russian conscripts has reached 3,500,000 soldiers, the number of conscripts in the Ukrainian army doesn't exceed 1,200,000. While Russia has about 2 million reserve soldiers, the number in Ukraine does not exceed 900,000. While the Russian army has 772 combat aircraft, Ukraine has only 69. The Russian defense budget and the annual average spending of the Russian army amount to $42 billion, while in Ukraine it does not exceed $9.6 billion. As for the attack helicopters, Russia owns 544 of them and Ukraine has 34. As for tanks, Russia has 12,420 tanks. Ukraine, on the other hand, has 2,596. Russia has 30,122 armored vehicles and Ukraine 12,303. And according to the same source, the number of Russian towed artillery reached 7,571, while the number in Ukraine did not exceed 2,040. Here, Hamoud, again, shelling have shifted to targeting kindergartens, schools and civilian buildings. And as we have just followed in our statistics, as mentioned by the United Nations, at least 50,000 Ukrainian civilians are on the way to escape and be migrants in the neighboring countries. Statistics as well show that maybe 5 million Ukrainians are likely to escape if things escalate more. Here, are European neighboring countries ready to handle this situation, taking into consideration it failed when it comes to Syrian migrants stuck on different European borders?
Well, there is a lot of sort of humanitarian support for the Ukrainian at this point. Neighbor countries, Poland included, Moldova, they are prepared for what you refer to more as a temporary displacement. So from that perspective, there is support, humanitarian supports. But down the road, this will pose a problem if the country is entered into some kind of all-ground war. This is why the European wants this to end very quickly. They want to reach a solution, and they want to preempt the humanitarian crisis that might ensue with this. What we have seen with the cases before, Europe is driven more by its national interests, and it's willing to take steps necessary to stop the flow of what, in this case, could mount to be refugees if its national priorities are not aligned with the flow of these refugees. So from that perspective, Europe is prepared in the media, in other words, in sending the image that they are. But in reality, this will pose problems for all countries.
Cool. Thank you, Hamoud. Russia, Adam, says that it is launching these military operations to protect Donbass, to protect it from Ukraine, a country that barely has enough military equipment in comparison to Russia, as we have just followed.
Yeah, it's as you put it so well. It's more of a fight between David and Goliath in some senses. The Ukrainian military has been deeply unmodernized since its economic troubles in 2014. This is where U.S. and Western support would really help, particularly in terms of counter-artillery radar, surveillance equipment to detect enemies, and that sort of thing. But really, it's a mismatched, unbalanced sort of situation. And with Russia moving in on Kiev, it does seem like it is not much left to it. If the Ukrainians, who have shown significant will in terms of defending their country, are able to turn the battle into a protracted, extended sort of like asymmetrical warfare, there is a chance that help could arrive or international will could be galvanized towards them. But for the time being, it doesn't seem to be the case. They're critically undermanned. They're dealing with around 60 Russian groups from 3 different areas, from the south, the east, and the north. Short of actual direct intervention, I don't see Ukraine being able to hold up to Russia, particularly because Russia has developed its playbook in Crimea years ago. And the hybrid strategy of little green men and sub-threshold combat operations is a deeply effective one that's sort of like isolating a nation in today's modern times and sort of just like taking it out without triggering interventions from nearby countries.
Well, let's move on together to follow this piece of information. And here, President Joe Biden has signed a memorandum to provide up to $600 million in immediate military assistance to Ukraine. The order directs Secretary of State Antony Blinken to provide immediate military assistance to Ukraine of up to $250 million in assistance without regard to any provision of law. A further $350 million was allocated in defense articles and services of the Department of Defense and Military Education and Training. This order comes after a call between Mr. Biden and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky spoke about strengthening sanctions against Russia and providing defense assistance to Kiev. Now, back to Hamoud. Warning sirens were heard yesterday night at dawn. And even this morning. Now, Ukrainian president said something quite important about being up on the top list of the Russian government. He is a target along his family. He said as well that yesterday is a crucial day for Kiev and it is decisive for the fate of the capital. Kiev did not fall. And this morning, President Zelensky shared, as we have seen in the beginning of the show, a video where he showed that he's still based in the capital. What is the message behind all of this when it comes to media at a time when Zelensky denied rumors that were referred to him as asking people to put down guns and surrender?
Well, the prize here for the Russian is to take control of Kiev, meaning that they will have the capital and then subsequently the end of the current government. For Zelensky is to make sure to make it clear to the Ukrainian that he's still in power. And for that matter, to counter what the Russians are saying, the Russians want to create a chaos, and this is part of the political propaganda that comes with wars like this, and to project the notion that the leadership, the top leadership, particularly the president in this case, are no longer in charge, and this will sort of create division, misinformation, all of this kind of things that will work in favor for the Russians. Well, the Ukrainian president is countering that by presenting videos and pictures that he's still in power, and that to him is a way of diffusing what the Russians are saying about him and about the collapse of his government.
Adam, still with Ukrainian president who is pushing for negotiations, do you think that Zelensky might stand still before one of the strongest military armed countries in the world, here speaking about Russia? President Zelensky has accepted the Russian demand for negotiations. What is the importance of deciding on the right place and time for both parts?
Well, I think from both sides, regardless of the rhetoric and the propaganda that's being used, both sides are aware that ultimately this ends in the negotiation table, and it's about the cards they can prepare going in. And that sort of ties directly towards the U.S. Financial aid, which is really more symbolic than effective because it takes time to procure weapons. And there's a huge, massive difference to begin with in defense fund spending. This doesn't really cover much. This is more of a liquid cash flow boost. Now, significantly enough, if I can just pause here for a second, allies of the U.S. are going to be looking towards this situation and saying, okay, we've chosen sides with the U.S. We've bought defense equipment from the U.S. They've committed themselves to European security and NATO and so forth. How do we actually behave in these circumstances when they're asking us to come to their aid and to support the Western international order? And unfortunately, there is a bit of a bias here because international mobilization of nations against Russia has been very effective and very rapid. But on a number of humanitarian interventions, for instance, in Yemen and the situation there, which the U.S. is directly involved in, we don't see this media coverage. So we have to be nuanced in understanding that there is an endgame here. And Zelensky is preparing his cards. Russia is also preparing as much captured territory as possible. You can apply game theory to this and sorts of just optimizing your positions before negotiations. And to end, as Clausewitz put it, war is an extension of politics. And this ultimately can only be resolved in a political manner. And it remains to be seen just how much each side will give up or be willing to give up to come to an end to this entire situation, which is not helping anybody economically, neither Europe, Russia, Ukraine, or any of the surrounding countries.
Cool. Now let's follow together. Russia, as expected, vetoed a UN Security Council resolution on Friday that deplored in the strongest terms the country's aggression against Ukraine and demanded the immediate withdrawal of its troops. Let's follow this report by Usama Ayadi.
In an unsurprising move, Russia has vetoed the UN Security Council resolution that demands Moscow cease its military action on Ukraine borders and withdraw all troops.
The Russian Federation voted against the Security Council's anti-Russian and anti-Ukrainian draft resolution that was presented today. Why is it anti-Russian? I think there is no need to explain it. Just take a quick look at the text. Why is it anti-Ukrainian? Because this document undoubtedly goes against the fundamental interests of the Ukrainian people, as it is an attempt to save and cement in Ukraine that system of power which has brought the country to the point of tragedy, and that has now lasted for at least 8 years.
While 11 of the Council's 15 members voted in favor of the text, China, India, and the United Arab Emirates abstained. A no vote from any one of the 5 permanent members of the Council stops action on any measure put before it. The body's permanent members are China, France, Russian Federation, the United Kingdom, and the United States.
The United Nations was born out of war to end war. Today, that objective was not achieved. But we must never give up. We must give peace another chance. Soldiers need to return to their barracks. Leaders need to turn to the paths of dialogue and peace.
The Security Council's latest attempt to end the Ukrainian crisis caps a week of activity at the United Nations seeking a diplomatic off-ramp to Russian military action in the country, including near-daily press takeouts by the Secretary General, 3 emergency council sessions, and 1 meeting of 193-member General Assembly, which saw speaker after speaker call for de-escalation. The General Assembly held a similar vote in 2014, condemning Russia's seizure of Crimea, which obtained 100 votes in support. Moscow had earlier vetoed the Security Council resolution condemning its actions in Crimea. 13 countries supported it, with China abstaining.
Adam, economically speaking now, what is SWIFT and how sanctions on payments could affect Russia's economy?
Yes. Well, there's, in the failure of, in the absence of international sanctions, there has been speculation mainly led by France in favor of cutting Russia off from the SWIFT international payment system. This was basically in sort of like a counterpoint to France, willing to supply weapons and military equipment to Ukraine. Now, again, while this may be effective as a sort of like warning measure, I think it's excellent in terms of just putting Russia on caution that there are consequences. So far, the EU and Western countries have failed to take the punitive measures, even if they're small, in fear of triggering, an escalated hot conflict. It really remains to be seen. I think it would be incredibly effective as a measure, but it may be perhaps too drastic financially. The Russian economy has already been showing significant deflation in a very short period of time with its ruble relative to the dollar, and that was to be expected, which kind of puts a time limit on how long it can maintain this sort of operation. Financial measures are directly aimed at sort of like restricting that and bringing an end to the conflict as soon as possible. But it remains to be seen how many countries are willing to support France, because France's engagement with this entire Ukraine-Russian affair hasn't been the most constructive in spite of its best efforts up to the present day.
Adam, thank you so much, as you have brought in our conversation foreign countries. And here, let me just welcome again Luqman Kadarag, and really apologies for keeping you waiting. Luqman, here, due to its close relations with Russia and also its investment trade volume and investment in Ukraine, China appeared as a major actor in the Ukrainian-Russian escalated tensions, as we can put it. So what kind of role currently is playing by China during this crisis? What can you say?
Thank you for having me, Nadia. Yes, China, as you say, has emerged as a biggest political player, major political player in this crisis, because China has a huge amount of investment in Ukraine. Also, 85% of China's revenue goes to Europe through the Belarus, and has a good relationship and a huge trade volume with Russia. Now there is the crisis, there is a relations with both countries, and when we come to the Russia and China relationship, they have mutual interest and mutual opposition, mutual ground towards the United States. Now China, as we're following through the media and the China's diplomatic involvement to the crisis, first Xi Jinping had a phone call with the Russian.
Okay, cool. That's nice. Okay, let's dig a little bit into the Russian economy. And Russia is the world's largest exporter of wheat, accounting for more than 18% of international exports. Russia and Ukraine together exported more than a quarter of the world's wheat, according to the Observatory of Economic Complexity. The food system is bending under the intense pressure of the world population growth and wars. We are going to move on again to another report here about a ban on sovereign debt transactions, a ban on dealing with large financial entities, a freeze on the assets and property of senior officials and policymakers in Moscow. The forms of Western sanctions imposed on Russia vary, and their scope widens, as there are many entities that approve them, but without exceeding the ceiling of separation, Russia on the system of global interbank payments. Sofian Kenturi has prepared this for us.
Despite growing threats to isolate Russia from the system known as SWIFT, many Western countries have included the decision in the last step by punishing Moscow, in view of potential damage to Russian banks, with serious and severe repercussions on the economies imported from Russia, especially gas and oil, as well as this cause major disruption of international trading system and make it difficult for European creditors to recover their money in return for Russian efforts that have paved the way nearly 10 years ago to build an alternative payment system. Data from the Bank for International Settlements show that European lenders hold a big share of foreign banks' exposure to Russia, as the system has more than 11,000 financial institutions in 200 countries, and Italian and French banks have debts of $25 billion on Russia, and the Austrians with more than $17.5 billion, while the American banks aspire to recover the royalties of Russia on $15 billion. Arabs await decisions, fearing the repercussions of isolation on their economies, as Russia has in recent years stepped up its commercial and investment presence in many Arab countries and embarked on what the West calls economic nuclear weapons, would disrupt the activity of most foreign operations associated with Russian entities. The expected Western approach risks paralyzing trade between Russia and the Arab countries, estimated at more than $18 billion a year, and freezing more than $50 billion of direct Russian investment in the region in return of Arab investments exceeding $6 billion in Russia.
Well, Luqman, United Nations have voted on a set of sanctions on Russian economy, including President Putin and his foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov. Don't you think that Russian civilians will pay as well the price of these sanctions?
Certainly, the Russian economy faced with this sanction from the 28 countries will suffer a lot. But honestly, through the sanction on the Mr. Putin and Mr. Lavrov, I don't believe just seems to like the symbolic sanctions, because I don't believe that Mr. Putin and Mr. Lavrov has the bank account or the transaction in the United States or in the European countries or the UK. At the end of the day, certainly the Russian economy and the Russian people will suffer a lot from these sanctions.
Cool. Let me now welcome in our studios our special journalist, Hussam Birkan, who is actually a PhD researcher in international relations. Things are escalating so fast. Russian military forces have seized control of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. What is the importance of Chernobyl for Russia?
Thank you so much, Nadia, for having me. So basically, a lot of people, when they hear Chernobyl, so many people know about it because there were a lot of TV series and a lot of movies about it, because it's one of the worst nuclear disasters, accidents in the history of humanity. And there are only two, there is a scale that measure actually the severity of these accidents, and it's called the International Nuclear Event Scale. And the Chernobyl accident was given 7, which is the maximum in the scale of severity, alongside the Fukushima in Japan in 2011, tsunami of 2011. So what is the importance of Chernobyl and Russia seizing Chernobyl? A lot of analysts and Western analysts, military Western analysts, are saying that Chernobyl is basically the fastest place for Russia to go directly to Kiev. So it is located in the north of Ukraine, in a place where there is nobody is living there because of the accident. So the analysts are saying that they're going to take this route from the north of Ukraine, which is near to the borders with Belarus, which is the ally of Russia, and they are seizing Chernobyl in order to take the fastest way toward the capital, Kiev.
Cool. Yeah. Ukraine has asked for Turkey's support. In a way, it asked her, do you think that Turkey would close the Strait of Bosphorus and the Dardanelles?
So basically, Turkey is in a very critical situation. There are a lot of pressure on Turkey because the relations between Turkey and Russia and relations between Turkey and Ukraine are really good, very advanced relations. And I'm going to mention why. You know that Turkey is taking 25% of the gas supply is taken as import is from Russia. And can you imagine that 85% of wheat is coming from Russia and Ukraine at the same time. And also Turkey is the only country, the only NATO member who bought the S-400 defense system from Russia, which was a very critical and a very criticized move from Turkey. So Turkey basically in a very difficult situation. The importance of the Strait of Bosphorus and Dardanelles is that these two waterways are important because Turkey is the only country that can take control over them thanks to the Montreal Convention. And basically, Ukraine asking Turkey to close these straits is very dangerous for Turkey. And Turkey is a very pragmatic country. So until now, they did not close it. Until now, can you imagine that 6 warships from Russia passed through the streets and one submarine.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Hassan, for bringing all of these insights. And before I get back to Hamoud and Lokman, let's follow the reactions to President Vladimir Putin's decision to launch it's not an invasion, but as he puts it, Putin, a military operation. US Vice President Joe Biden and his NATO counterparts decided Saturday to send tens of thousands of troops backed by air and naval support to protect members between Russia and Ukraine. Islam Sidi reports.
In a response to a large-scale incursion of Russia over Ukraine, the NATO and the West pledged to send more troops including land, air and naval support to its allies in Ukrainian soil. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg did not give any details about the number and the placement of troops that will be deployed.
Today, the North Atlantic Council decided to activate our defense plans at request of our top military commander, General Todd Walters.
The NATO response force is estimated to be up to 40,000 troops. However, Stoltenberg said he would not be deploying the entire force. The declaration came after NATO members counter Estonia and Bulgaria prompted urgent meeting about their security within fears from the Russian military operation.
This is a prudent and defensive step to protect and shield allied nations during this crisis. And it will enable us to deploy capabilities and forces, including the NATO response force, to where they are needed.
According to officials, a few of NATO's member countries are supplying Ukraine with weaponry, ammunition and other equipment, but NATO as a whole body is not. It will not take any military action to defend Ukraine, which is a close ally but has no chance to be a NATO member. The Baltic members, however, have said that the West should send more support to Ukraine, including humanitarian aid. NATO has also activated an emergency planning system in the short term to allow commanders to move forces swiftly. In addition to 5,000 already deployed troops, the Pentagon said on Thursday that will send 7,000 troops to Europe.
So here, just as we are running out of time, Hamoud, well, after Russia has the right to defend its territories and protect itself, why not by not allowing the NATO forces to be present near its borders? Just in a couple of words, what do you think?
I think this whole puts the NATO purpose in perspective. Remember when the Soviet Union collapsed, the issue of who is the enemy of the Western world, where NATO and the European responded at the time that it's the Islamist terrorism, all that sort of things. Later on, when Putin took over and Russia started to project its power and demand a place in the international sphere, Russia became the enemy. So from that perspective, we are continuing to see the NATO presence or purpose as directed to finding another enemy. Now, from the perspective of the Russians, just geography will tell you something. During the Cold War, Moscow was only 1,300 miles away. Today, the NATO is close to Moscow by 300 miles or 500. So it's a very serious point for the Russians, and they should be taken into consideration when they say that their borders are in threat and their national security is at threat.
Thank you. Lokman, as well, just in a couple of words, having common interests against the United States, Russia's invasion or the military, let's say, operation that was launched against Ukraine also brought up China's invasion of Taiwan. Will Russia's attack on Ukraine trigger China's attack on Taiwan, or will the US be able to fight Russia and China at the same time on this issue?
Yes, this is big similarities between Ukraine and Taiwan. And now we can say that the Ukraine crisis make it clear that now Taiwan is an existential threat to the United States. Let me go to the World War II. During World War II, the United States has power to attack on the Germany and Japan both. But now, when we look at the crisis in Ukraine and the demand from the Ukraine's presidency to the NATO, as President Zelensky says, I call 27 members of NATO, anyone couldn't respond, they are free from Russia. And at the same time, United States, there is no clear response from the United States because there is a great discussion between the decision maker in the Washington D.C. They believe that the Asia and Taiwan is the biggest threat and the biggest priority for both. Now, this issue with Ukraine will convert China and Russia more closer than before. And certainly, Russia will be dependent on China. The Russian dependency will get much deeper to the China. And now the expectation, according to the Beijing calculations, it believes that Beijing will invade Taiwan in 2027. Now, this bring these two cases together. Washington seems to be in a weak position, and Europe in a weak position, really, according in the face of this invasion. They couldn't move freely.
Thank you. Thank you, Lokman Kadarag, for joining us along all the panel of guests who joined us during this show, including Hamoud Salhi and Adam bin Saeed. That's it for today's live coverage. Our English news edition is up next. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.